Hi folks, look at that. Angelic godliness. Got a halo shining out of my head. Fantastic. In fact, if I try and do this, look like I've got horns really, don't I? That's probably far more accurate. Big horns coming out of my head. Oh, yes. Well, we all know where I'm ending up, don't we? Anyway, Richard Lehman reviews, and we're on to book number 8 now. I'm trying to crack through these over the next couple of days. I'm hoping to get this whole thing done within the next week, time permitting. So, Richard Lehman, book number 8 in my top 10. Difficult to choose what my 8th favourite book was. They're all difficult at this point, but I've chosen his 1993 book, Endless Night. This one is one that seems to get the biggest divide in opinion. You either love it or you hate it. There doesn't seem to be any in between. And the reason why people love it is the exact reason why people hate it. This is Lehman at his most Lehman-esque. This is Richard Lehman writing a book whereby he's decided to literally go as unhinged as he possibly can and write a book that's just wall-to-wall violence from start to finish. So the synopsis and story of this is really, really simple and basic. You got these two kids, Joni, what's her name? I thought her name was Joni, can't quite remember, and Andy anyway. And is it Jodie? It's a good start to review. Jodie and Andy, I think. She's 16, he's 12, and there's a break-in at the house. And these maniacs break in, and these kids escape, and the maniacs butcher everyone. And one of the maniacs is then targeted with tracking these two kids down because they're the two kids that have escaped and killing them. And that is basically the synopsis of the book. You've literally got two kids, two teenagers, like I say, one's 16, one's 12, on the run from this one absolutely depraved, unhinged mental case called Simon Quirt, I think his name is, and he's one of these crazies that are a part of a gang called the Krulls. It's an interesting throwback because the Krulls was the name of the creatures from the Woods of Dark. So, and I think they reference the fact they've got their name from a book. So it's quite a cool throwback to his own work. But this gang, the Krulls, are one of Lehman's most unhinged because they don't really have any motive or reason for doing the things they do. They break into people's homes, they torture people, they mutilate them, they skin them, they sculpt them, they rape them, they torture them in every conceivable way, and then they kill them. And you know they're not afraid to wear human faces, or they dress up as clowns. They're just mad. And there's no real reason or motivation for why they do it other than the fact they love killing. And how they got together and did this, I'm not quite sure. I don't think it's actually really explained satisfactorily as to how this gang actually came to be, that you've got all these psychopaths together. But you have. But it's quite a scary proposition. They're basically a group of mentalists who just like to torture and kill. And so that's what they do. So you've got these teenagers on the run trying to outwit and escape this one. And the structure of the book's unusual in that it's written both in the first and the third person. The bits with Jodie and Andy are written in the third person, and they're about their escape and their adventures. The bits with Simon are written in the first person. The reason that Lehman does that is that this character Simon's been targeted by this gang to kill Jodie and Andy. It's his responsibility. And they've said, if you don't do that, we're going to kill your family. You know, so he's kind of been ousted from this gang a little bit. And he's a bit annoyed about this. So he's basically creating this diary, a bit like what Rupert did in Ireland, where he was writing all this stuff in this diary. So if they were found, he'd have a documented series of the events, even though what he was doing in that book made no sense in the context of the story. Whereas here, Simon's recording of this I think he's recording on a cassette, does make sense, because the idea is that if something happens to his family, he's got leverage over the gang. He knows who they are, where they live, what they do, how to identify them, and he's basically using this so that if something happens to them or him, he's got these tapes that will find their way to the police, basically, so this entire gang can be put down. So he's using it a bit as leverage. So I'm just trying to get out of this. That's better. So he's using it a bit as leverage. Back to the horns. Oh, I've been called up. It's like the aliens. So that this gang can't really do anything to him. But at the same time, whilst he's been told to do this task, he actually wants to. And the main reason he wants to is because he wants to kill Andy, and he wants to do the things to Jodie that, you know, layman's young men villains want to do to girls. You know, he's a horrific human being, and that's what he wants to do. And obviously, this being a layman book, it's filled with unpleasantness. But to a level that I think this was probably the zenith of that. This has got more violence and mutilation and murder and stuff in it, and rape and stuff, than I think the majority of books that Layman's wrote. In fact, I'd say this is probably the most graphic book that Layman wrote. It's just pure violence and nastiness from start to finish, really. And it's done so in a way that's almost cartoonish. It got to the point where it's hard to be offended by the content because it's so cartoonish and so over the top that you can't help but just find it a bit. Again, it reminded me of like a Troma movie, you know, or the early stuff by Peter Jackson, like Braindead or Bad Taste, that sort of stuff, where it's just so goofy. It's quite funny in that sense, but it is an unpleasant read in that sense, and I can understand why it's got a lot of very low reviews for people that have bought this and thought it's just far too much sickening stuff. But at the same time, the pace of this is relentless. It is so. This is a defining example of Layman able to convey action at a pace that I don't think any other horror author could. Because this isn't a small book. It's about 450 odd pages or so, and you just fly through it. It's just solid wall-to-wall action, and it goes to places you don't expect. Like, you know from the synopsis and from the opening chapter that Jodie and Andy are going to escape the house, but what happens to them after? Nothing is off the cards. There's no guarantee that anyone is going to make it out alive in this book, and that's especially true in terms of the way that this ends with that first and third person narrative. It's very clear that Layman knew how he was going to end this book rather than wrote himself into a corner. I've mentioned before that a lot of Layman endings are a bit unsatisfactory. He often doesn't know how he's going to end a book. I think that he had the idea of the ending of this book at the same time he had the idea for the story, and then he wrote the story to fit it. And yet he wrote a cracking story to fit it because it's got a genuinely well thought out end. It's not an end that everyone's going to like, but it's a very well planned ending. And I think the overall construction of this book is one of his best structured and written books, despite the fact that it's a horrific story. It's a very well composed tale. So it's one-dimensional. It is just very violent, but it's tense. It's one of the tensest books that Layman's ever wrote. It's pure action. It's pure violence. It's pure nastiness. It's just a cat and mouse hunt over the course of a very short period of time between characters you want to escape and this awful human being, and the carnage that just goes on. It's just mad. So that's Endless Night from 1993, released at like pretty much the peak era of Richard Layman. And for all the books he ever wrote that were deemed splatterpunk, this was probably the most splatterpunkery, if that's a word, of them. So I enjoyed it. I understand why other people won't. I understand that some people find it too much. But if you want to read just something that's just carnage, and it's a great example of early splatterpunk stuff, this is a fantastic example of that, and one of Layman's best constructed books. So that's Endless Night at number 8.